Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where I cover missing persons, unsolved cases, crime news, and more. Well, a lot of you are aware of the Menendez brothers potentially getting resentenced by the year's end and potentially getting freed. Now, just to remind folks that are not aware, the brothers were both sentenced to life without parole back in 1996 over the double murder of their parents, Jose and Kitty, in 1989. An initial attempt to convict them ended up in a mistrial, and a second trial did not allow their claims of being sexually abused by their father to be included as evidence. So now that has been coming to light, and according to a family member, there's a letter to a now deceased cousin. Erik had written him. His name was Andy Cano. He had told his cousin that he had been trying to avoid Dad and that it is still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now, alluding to the sexual abuse he experienced at that time at the hands of his father. Now, the cousin, he died in 2003. He originally testified before a jury that Erik Menendez had told him about his father's abuse when he was 13 years old. His mother found the letter 9 years ago, and it was included in a 2023 petition to examine whether the brothers were unlawfully imprisoned. Currently, the recommendation is with a Los Angeles judge, whom former DA George Gascon had asked to reduce their murder convictions to manslaughter, which, if approved, it could make them eligible for parole pretty much immediately. As of this point, their resentencing hearing has been set for December 11th, and that is going to decide if they have a shot at freedom, and they have currently been behind bars for 34 years. So I kind of wanted to look back at some of the case back originally from 1989 through the trials, and kind of see what you guys think. I mean, the bottom line is, do you think that these brothers should have a chance at parole? Do you think that 34 years is enough and that Erik and Lyle should be freed and be allowed to get out of jail? Alright, so let's back up to August 20th, 1989. Kitty and Jose Menendez were shot to death in their home in the den. They were watching TV, and allegedly 2 men came in with guns and shot them. In a frantic 911 call that evening, Lyle reported that someone had killed his parents. The brothers initially told law enforcement that the killings could have been linked to their dad's work, because he was a wealthy executive at an entertainment company whose founder had ties to the porn industry. However, authorities found no evidence to support that claim, and later focused on the brothers. In the days after the murders, investigators made the discovery that the brothers had been spending money lavishly, believing they could be disinherited from the family's multi-million-dollar estate, and they were seeking out their father's will. So this pretty much put them on the investigators' radar. March 8th, 1990 is when the brothers were arrested. Beverly Hills PD announced Lyle's arrest. Erik, who was at the time in Israel for a tennis tournament, was in custody just days later. When their trial began 3 years later, the brothers relied on a legal doctrine known as imperfect self-defense and testified that their father had sexually abused them for many years. Lyle stated that he had been molested from the ages of 6 to 8 years old, and Erik said it was going on at the time of the murders. Both brothers fatally shot their parents, they testified, after Lyle confronted his father, Jose, about his brother's abuse. When Lyle threatened to expose his father. He testified Jose appeared to threaten him and his brother. State prosecutors alleged that the sexual abuse claims were false and identified money as the motive in the brothers killing mom and dad. So let's look back at the trial and the state's opening statement.
On August the 20th of 1989, at approximately 11:47 p.m., Beverly Hills Police Dispatcher Christina Nye received a 911 call at the police station. On the line was Lyle Menendez, who sounded hysterical, reporting that, quote, "Someone shot my mom and my dad," end quote. You will hear that 911 tape, and you will hear the emotion manifested in that phone call. Police officers from the Beverly Hills Police Department arrived at the scene, 722 North Elm Drive, in under 5 minutes. Police Officer Michael Butkus and Sergeant Kirk West, both of the Beverly Hills Police Department, will testify in this case. Officer Butkus arrived at the scene first. He approached the house, and shortly thereafter, he heard screaming as the two defendants, Erik Menendez and Lyle Menendez, came running out the front door. Officer Butkus will describe the demeanor of the defendants that night in their first contact with the police. Sergeant West was one of the last units to arrive at the scene in response to the initial radio dispatch. Sergeant West and other officers entered the house to determine what had happened and to determine if the killers were still inside of the house. Sergeant West will describe his discovery of the bodies of Jose Enrique Menendez and Mary Louise Menendez inside of the family room of the Menendez home that night. Sergeant West determined that both victims were dead, and he also noticed that pellet patterns he observed in the room indicated to him that a shotgun had been used in the killings. Sergeant West is familiar with shotguns, and he did not notice any visual signs of shotgun smoke, nor did he smell any shotgun smoke in the room. Neither did he see any signs of expended shotgun shells. He also noticed that both the television set and the lights were on inside of that room where the bodies were found. The police proceeded through the house, and Sergeant West noticed that there were 2 rifles inside a closet in a bedroom upstairs. Sergeant West also searched a guest house in the back of the Menendez property. The lights were on inside of the guest house, and its front door was open. No other weapons were noticed or recovered at the crime scene that night, aside from the 2 rifles seen in the upstairs closet by Sergeant West. Both of the defendants were taken to the police station to be interviewed. The house was now off limits while the police and coroner's personnel began the grim task of examining the Menendez home and its contents. At 1:42 a.m., 2 hours after the 911 call, Sergeant Thomas Edmonds, also of the Beverly Hills Police Department, spoke with Lyle Menendez to find out what he knew about the events of that evening and who might have committed this crime. Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds that he and his brother had gone to the movies that night at Century Plaza, and then had gone to the Santa Monica Civic Center to attend a food and wine tasting function. Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds that he was supposed to meet a friend of his by the name of Perry Berman at the Santa Monica Civic Center. Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds that he and his brother had missed Mr. Berman at the Santa Monica Civic Center, and so Lyle Menendez called Mr. Berman from a payphone at the Civic Center. Lyle Menendez used a U.S. Sprint calling card registered to his father, Jose Menendez, and the records of that transaction show 2 phone calls made to Perry Berman from a payphone at the Santa Monica Civic at 11:07 and 11:15 p.m. Lyle Menendez went on to tell Sergeant Edmonds that during these 2 telephone calls, he arranged to meet Perry Berman at a restaurant in Beverly Hills instead that night. Lyle Menendez continued and told Sergeant Edmonds that he and his brother returned home to pick up some sort of identification for Erik Menendez, which would enable him to enter a bar should they and Perry Berman decide to go for drinks. Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds that the defendants entered the house, found their parents, and called the police. Lyle Menendez specifically mentioned the smell of smoke in reference to entering the room where his parents' bodies were found. Contrast this with the statement of Sergeant West that when he entered the family room, he neither saw nor smelled smoke. Sergeant Edmonds asked Lyle Menendez if he had any idea as to who would have done this crime. Lyle Menendez opined that his father would probably be the reason for the murders, that it would have been business-related, and that some of the people affiliated with his father's business were seedy. Lyle Menendez also told Sergeant Edmonds that he knew that there were 2 rifles inside of the house and that his mother had just purchased one of them. Lyle Menendez went on to say that he called the police shortly after discovering his parents' bodies and that the police came pretty quickly. In describing the crime scene, Lyle Menendez told Sergeant Edmonds the following: It doesn't seem like they heard anything because they were on the couch, and my dad is usually pretty deaf to hear something, so when he gets up right away, and he continued on, so I was really surprised that he was sitting on the couch like that. My mother was on the floor, like she was trying to get away or something. Sergeant Edmonds next spoke to Erik Menendez during those early morning hours. Erik Menendez, too, told Sergeant Edmonds that he and his brother had gone to the movies that night and had gotten lost going to Santa Monica to see Perry Berman. A neighbor of the Menendezes who lives 2 doors south of their home will testify that she heard popping noises that night at around 10 p.m., almost 2 hours before the 911 call made by Lyle Menendez. This neighbor thought the noises were made by firecrackers, and so she dissuaded her son from calling the police. When detectives arrived at the crime scene, they too saw the bodies discovered by Sergeant West. The detectives also saw that there were no expended shotgun shells in the room where the murders had occurred. Perry Berman will be a witness in this case. He is the young man who was to meet the Menendez brothers at the Santa Monica Civic Center. He will tell you that on the afternoon before the killings, that is, the afternoon of August the 20th, he arrived home to find a message on his answering machine from Lyle Menendez. When he finally reached Lyle Menendez by phone, Lyle Menendez wanted to see him that night. Perry Berman had already made plans to go to the food and wine tasting event in Santa Monica, but he invited Lyle Menendez to join Perry and a friend of his with whom he had already made plans. Perry Berman will tell you that he did not see Lyle Menendez in Santa Monica, and he went home to bed. Around 11 o'clock that night, Mr. Berman received a telephone call from Lyle Menendez, who urged him to meet with the Menendez brothers at their parents' home in Beverly Hills, whereupon they would go somewhere else to eat. Not wanting to disturb the Menendez parents, Perry Berman agreed to meet Lyle Menendez at the Cheesecake Factory in Beverly Hills, which is a restaurant. Mr. Berman dressed, went to the Cheesecake Factory, and waited for a half hour for the defendants to arrive. While there, the night silence was broken by the sound of sirens, and after concluding that the brothers were not going to show up, Mr. Berman went towards the Menendez home. When he got there, he saw the police, whose sirens he had heard while waiting at the restaurant. Forensic criminalists from the Sheriff's Department will testify about some of the conclusions which can and cannot be made from looking at the photographs of the crime scene in this case. A doctor from the coroner's office who performed the autopsies on Mr. and Mrs. Menendez will describe the wounds which ended the lives of these victims. The coroner's representative will tell you that Mr. Menendez had 5 shotgun wounds, the major one being an entrance wound to the back of Mr. Menendez's head. He will also tell you that Mrs. Menendez had 10 separate shotgun wounds, some of which could have been caused by the same blast. An expert on firearms will testify as to the workings of a shotgun, shotgun pellet patterns, and other things specific to this crime scene. The head of the Sheriff's Serology Department will tell you that Jose Menendez was not killed precisely in the position in which you will see him in the photographs, due to the pooling of blood on the family sofa. He will also tell you what can and cannot be said about this crime scene. Shortly after the killings, Lyle Menendez began to spend money, a lot of money. On Thursday, August the 24th, he, in the company of his brother, purchased 3 Rolex watches and some money clips. On September the 8th of 1989, 19 days after the killings, A life insurance policy which had been procured earlier by Jose Menendez was paid to the defendants. The policy cumulatively was for $650,000, and over a period of a week between September the 8th and September the 15th, $325,000 was paid out to each defendant. Lyle Menendez returned to the Princeton, New Jersey area after a memorial service for his parents, which was held in Los Angeles on August the 25th of 1989. Lyle Menendez had been a student at Princeton University in the spring of 1989, and the family had lived in the township at Princeton before moving to California earlier. During the initial few days of his stay in Princeton, Lyle Menendez hired bodyguards to guard him. Lyle Menendez and his bodyguards traveled around Princeton in limousines during this period. Richard Wenskowski was hired as one of those bodyguards. He will testify in this case, and Mr. Wenskowski will tell you that one day he accompanied Lyle Menendez to the airport so that Lyle Menendez could make a quick trip from the East Coast to the West Coast. You will learn from other evidence that once in Los Angeles, Lyle Menendez hired a computer expert named Howard Witkin to access the Menendez family's home computer. Lyle Menendez had Howard Witkin, the computer expert, look through the family's computer menu for 4 different headings. Those headings were entitled Erik, Will, Lyle, and Menendez. Mr. Witkin found files with 3 of these headings, but there was no information of any use in those computer files. Lyle Menendez asked Mr. Witkin to erase the entire computer so that he could sell the computer. Mr. Witkin did so and was paid with a check drawn on the account of Jose Menendez for $150. The computer was erased by Mr. Witkin on August the 31st, 1989, 11 days after the deaths of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez. Mr. Wenskowski will also tell you that he had a conversation with Lyle Menendez, during which Lyle Menendez asked him if ballistics evidence could be used to trace an expended shotgun shell to a particular weapon. Mr. Wenskowski told him no. After erasing the computer, Lyle Menendez returned to Princeton the same day. Sometime after the computer's erasure, Lyle Menendez had a conversation with his best friend, Glenn Stevens. Mr. Stevens was a student at Princeton University in the fall of 1989 and had been enrolled with Lyle Menendez during the spring semester of 1989, several months before. Lyle Menendez told his best friend, Glenn Stevens, after the killings, that Lyle's uncle Carlos had found something in the family computer which was under one of 3 headings. Lyle Menendez told Glenn Stevens that Lyle Menendez's father had been upset with him and that if there was a new will in the computer, he, Lyle, might not be in it. Lyle Menendez told him that the will that the family was aware of, that is, the other relatives in the family, had left everything to Lyle Menendez and his brother. Lyle Menendez told Mr. Stevens that the person he had hired to erase the computer was some little Jewish guy, that no one would ever be able to find him. On December the 5th of 1989, several months now after the murders, the police found Mr. Witkin. They served a search warrant at 722 North Elm Drive and recovered the family's computer. Alongside the computer was a receipt for services rendered dated August the 31st, 1989, and this receipt led the police to the discovery of Mr. Witkin. On September the 17th, now going backwards, but September the 17th, less than a month after the killings, Beverly Hills police detectives interviewed Lyle Menendez at the home of one of his relatives in New Jersey. The conversation dealt with various habits of the victims, with the activities of the Menendez family the weekend of the killings, possible motives for the killings, and the activities of the defendants on the evening of the killing. Lyle Menendez told the police that the night before the killings, which would have been Saturday, August the 19th, the Menendez family had gone night fishing and had gotten home about 12:30 a.m. early on Sunday morning. He told the police that he and his brother went to the movies the night of the killings, that he and his brother went to see License to Kill, but that it was sold out, and so they saw Batman instead, and it was a movie they had both seen previously. After the movie, Lyle Menendez and his brother, in his brother's car and with his brother driving, had gone to Santa Monica to meet Perry Berman and they had gotten lost along the way. Lyle Menendez explained to the detectives that he hadn't seen Mr. Berman in 3 weeks prior to the killings, that he had a lot of things going on that he wanted to talk to Mr. Berman about, and that, quote, I had to go see him, unquote. He also acknowledged that Perry Berman worked on Monday, that he'd called him at about 11 or 11:15 to meet at the Cheesecake Factory, and Lyle acknowledged that this was his idea. He explained that he and his brother went back to the house to get phony ID so that his brother could go drink if necessary, which is when they found their parents. Lyle Menendez again mentioned the smoke to the detectives on September the 17th. He mentioned the smoke that he saw in the room upon the discovery of his parents' bodies. He said the police were called right away and arrived right away. Lyle Menendez was asked by the detectives about his parents' sleeping habits, particularly about whether they would fall asleep while watching television. Lyle Menendez told the detectives that his father would fall asleep in a movie just like that, but that his mother had insomnia, so whether or not she would fall asleep was a matter of how tired she was. He also said that his father was not easily awakened, but that his mother awoke easily. Lyle Menendez also told the police that the maid had Saturdays and Sunday nights off. In another portion of the discussion, Lyle Menendez was comforted by the detectives that both of his parents had not suffered and had died instantaneously. Lyle Menendez and the detectives discussed possible motives for the killings, and the subject turned to Jose Menendez's business dealings. Lyle Menendez told the police that his father had received threats from people. He discussed the possibility that his parents' deaths were linked to organized crime, and also discussed his own needs for a bodyguard because he was being followed. Lyle Menendez made the statement that, quote, it's pretty difficult to get good security, unquote. But from what we now know, this hint that his own life might have been in danger because of his parents' killings was a lie. In response to the police questions about any problems that Lyle might have had with his parents, Lyle Menendez told the police that he and his mother had recently quarreled over the fact that he had locked himself out of the family home and he had to wake his mother to get inside, a fairly trivial incident. He said that he had no other problems with his parents. While the police were there questioning Lyle Menendez, they noticed that he was wearing a gold Rolex watch, and he confirmed that he had purchased it shortly before his parents' memorial service, which the evidence will show was on August the 25th. He also indicated that he had charged the Rolex watch on his father's credit card. By March of 1990, 6.5 months after the killings, the police were getting ready to make arrests for the murders of Jose and Mary Louise Menendez. Around this time, Glenn Stevens, Lyle's best friend from Princeton, flew from Princeton to Los Angeles with Lyle Menendez and another Princeton student named Hayden Rogers. Once in Los Angeles, Lyle Menendez told Glenn Stevens that he, Lyle, had called back east to the East Coast and had discovered that the Beverly Hills police detectives had been there recently. Glenn Stevens will describe Lyle as being made nervous by this. At this time, Lyle took approximately $2,000 out of his pocket and divided it between Glenn Stevens and Mr. Rogers. Lyle Menendez told Glenn Stevens that, should anything happen to him, Mr. Stevens should contact Lyle Menendez's attorney. Lyle Menendez also told Mr. Stevens that there were only two people who knew everything, his attorney and a man named Dr. Oziel. Lyle Menendez explained to Glenn Stevens that Dr. Oziel had some cassette tapes in a safety deposit box, and that if the police ever got their hands on those tapes, he, Lyle Menendez, would be, and I apologize, fucked. On March the 8th of 1990, the police executed a search warrant at the home of Dr. Oziel. The police searched a safety deposit box belonging to Dr. Oziel and obtained a cassette tape which contained Dr. Oziel's verbal notes of 2 psychological sessions he had had with both Erik and Lyle Menendez. Lyle Menendez was arrested the same day by the Beverly Hills Police Department for the murders of his parents. Lyle Menendez's prediction to Glenn Stevens as to what would happen to him if the police got their hands on the Oziel tape had come true. The shotguns used in the murders were never recovered. After searching Dr. Oziel's safety deposit box, the police were led to the San Diego area in search of records which would show the purchase of shotguns. After visiting several stores, the police went to a Big Five sporting goods store. In searching the records, they discovered firearms purchase records in the name of a man named Donovan Goodrow. Early on in the investigation, in September, the police had traveled back east to interview family and friends of the victims and the defendants. During this visit, the police confirmed that Lyle Menendez had a friend named Donovan Goodrow, who lived on the East Coast. When the police saw Donovan Goodrow's name on the purchase records for 2 shotguns in San Diego, which were purchased 2 days before the killings on August the 18th, 1989, the police knew that they had hit pay dirt. Donovan Goodrow will tell you that on August the 18th, 1989, 2 days before the Menendez killings, he was not in San Diego buying 2 shotguns, but instead was working in a restaurant in the city of New York. Mr. Goodrow will also tell you that he had been a roommate of Lyle Menendez's in the spring of 1989 at Princeton University, although he himself was not a student at Princeton University. Lyle Menendez kicked Mr. Goodrow out of his room. He no longer wished Mr. Goodrow to be his roommate. And in approximately May of 1989, Mr. Goodrow left for New York City. Mr. Goodrow will also tell you that he discovered that his wallet and identification were missing when he traveled to New York. Glenn Stevens will tell you that Lyle Menendez bragged to Glenn Stevens that he had stolen Mr. Goodrow's wallet in order to get back at Mr. Goodrow because Lyle Menendez suspected that Donovan Goodrow had stolen money from Lyle Menendez. Lyle Menendez also indicated that he would forge Mr. Goodrow's signature to obtain this retribution. Amanda Adams Greer was working at the Big Five sporting goods store on August the 18th. She will explain to you the various forms that were filled out to complete the purchase, and you will see the name Donovan Goodrow on those forms. You will also see a copy of his California driver's license, which was in his possession before he left Princeton, and you will see that Mr. Goodrow's license number is also on the firearms transaction forms, filled out in part by one of the brothers and in part by Ms. Greer. You will also learn that the address given on the form, that is the firearms transaction form, is a location which is unknown to Mr. Goodrow and is in fact an address which does not exist within the San Diego area. Ms. Greer, the firearms saleswoman, will also tell you that the purchase was made with cash and that she did not sell any ammunition when she sold the 2 shotguns. A handwriting examiner from the district attorney's office will testify about the firearms transaction forms. He will tell you that he cannot be 100% sure of whose writing appears on the forms, mainly because there's not enough handwriting on the firearms transaction forms to make a comparison. But between the signatures of Donovan Goodrow, the handwriting of Lyle Menendez, and the handwriting of Erik Menendez, the expert will tell you that the signature on the firearms transaction forms was most likely made by Erik Menendez. He will also tell you that the name Goodrow on those firearms forms is misspelled. In the summer of 1990, Lyle Menendez was ordered by a judge to provide a handwriting sample for the purpose of making comparisons for this handwriting examiner. He refused to provide a sample of his handwriting. In June of 1990, when he made this refusal, there was no way he could have known that the handwriting examiner could not make a 100% comparison because the handwriting examiner did not perform his comparison until 1992. In spite of Lyle Menendez's refusal to provide a handwriting sample, other samples of his writing were obtained in this case. I have mentioned Dr. Oziel, the therapist whose tape led to the arrest of Lyle Menendez. You will hear testimony from Dr. Oziel, and he will tell you the following. On the evening of October the 31st, 1989, approximately 2 months after the killings, and also the night of Halloween, Dr. Oziel was in his office, and he called Lyle Menendez at home and asked him to come to the office. When Lyle Menendez got there, his brother Erik Menendez and Dr. Oziel were already there. Dr. Oziel informed Lyle Menendez at that time that Erik Menendez had confessed that Erik had murdered his parents. Lyle Menendez became extremely agitated and informed those present that Erik's confession was very stupid and that now it was no longer a perfect murder. Lyle Menendez was fearful that Dr. Oziel would tell someone of the brothers' participation in the killings, that he, Lyle Menendez, did not want anyone looking over his shoulder, and that is why he had killed his parents. Erik Menendez left this session before Lyle Menendez, and then Lyle Menendez left. 2 days later, on November the 2nd of 1989, the brothers again visited Dr. Oziel. At the beginning of the session, Dr. Oziel explained to Lyle Menendez why it was necessary for Erik Menendez to confess the murders to Dr. Oziel. Dr. Oziel explained that he was keeping notes of the sessions, and Lyle Menendez was alarmed by this. Dr. Oziel told the brothers that notes of those sessions were being kept in a safety deposit box, and that Dr. Oziel had given keys to this box to several attorneys, and that he, Dr. Oziel, had instructed these attorneys to open the safety deposit box if he should die mysteriously. This was Dr. Oziel's life insurance policy. Dr. Oziel explained to Lyle Menendez that he and his brother should attempt to be treated psychologically for whatever it was that had caused them to kill their parents. Lyle Menendez told Dr. Oziel that there really wasn't anything to work on because what had caused him to commit murder was no longer here. He had killed them both. During the second conversation on November the 2nd, the defendants told Dr. Oziel that they killed their father because he controlled them and made them feel inferior, while preaching morality to them. They went on to acknowledge that they saw their father as being basically a moral person. Dr. Oziel asked them why they had killed their mother. The gist of what Dr. Oziel will tell you that they told him is that Mrs. Menendez was killed because the brothers had made such a good plan to kill their father, and the plan included their mother, that they just had to keep her in the plan. According to Dr. Oziel, the brothers considered not killing their mother, but decided to go ahead anyway with her killing because their plan was too perfect to alter. Besides, they told Dr. Oziel, their mother had been depressed lately and probably would have been unable to live without their father anyway. During the rest of the November 2nd session, the brothers were entranced with the perfection of the crime that they had committed. Lyle expressed sadness at having killed his mother, but acknowledged that he had fired the shots which, in the end, had killed her. Dr. Oziel asked Lyle Menendez if he felt guilty about inheriting millions of dollars from his parents. Lyle Menendez laughed, but went on to explain that he had not committed the murders for money. Lyle Menendez told Dr. Oziel that his uncle had suspected that the family computer contained another will, which would have disinherited the brothers. Lyle explained to Dr. Oziel that he had arranged to have the computer's hard disk erased to avoid the possibility of a second will. The defendants went on to tell Dr. Oziel that they killed their parents out of hatred and a desire to be free of their father's domination and impossible standards. The defendants did not tell Dr. Oziel during these two sessions that the killings were done in self-defense or that they had suffered any physical or sexual abuse. During the second session on November the 2nd, Lyle Menendez expressed concern that the notes that Dr. Oziel had kept never be revealed. Lyle told Dr. Menendez how embarrassing it would be if he were found out. Lyle Menendez joked to the doctor that if a robber ever tried to break into Dr. Oziel's home and shoot him, he should be aware that the robber would probably be shot, and that when he looked up, he would probably see Lyle Menendez saying, "Have a good night's sleep, Jerry." Lyle Menendez had made an uneasy alliance with the man who held his secrets. The remainder of the November 2nd session dealt with the defendants' upcoming trip to Hawaii and where they should stay on the islands. It is anticipated that the people's case will take less than a month to present to you. During that time, we will prove to you that Lyle Menendez planned this murder, provided false identification for the purchase of 2 shotguns, set up an alibi, acquired ammunition, repeated the alibi to the police shortly after the crime, and then set off to spend the money which he had acquired through the killings of his parents. Based upon this evidence, it will become apparent that this murder was unlawful, unjustified, and wholly premeditated, and that it was accomplished through a conspiracy into which Lyle Menendez entered with his brother, and that but for a few mistakes they made, this was almost the perfect murder.
And now that we've heard the state's opening statement, let's jump to the defense's opening statement.
Menendez killed their parents. We're not disputing where it happened, how it happened, who did it. We're not disputing when it happened. The only thing that you are going to have to focus on in this trial is why it happened. And the prosecution has suggested to you that it was done for money. It was done to commit the perfect crime. It was done possibly out of hatred. And what we will prove to you is it was done out of fear. You will be given a great deal of evidence to evaluate. In deciding whether you believe that this crime, that these children killed their parents for money, you will get an idea of what their life was like before. They were living in a Beverly Hills mansion. Lyle was attending Princeton University. He was driving the brand new Alfa Romeo he got for high school graduation. He'd had credit cards since he was 15 for both phone and to buy whatever he wanted. They had the most expensive tennis coaches. They took expensive vacations, and everyone who knew Lyle said he had, Lyle Menendez, knew he had all of the money that he needed. His father had been on a meteoric rise within the last couple of years, and things were only getting better. He was going to make more money the next year than he had the last, and more money the year after that. He was aggressive, he was talented, he was going to win at any cost. But his family was going with him wherever he went, and money was not going to be an issue. Lyle Menendez was going to be supported by, directed by, controlled by, and taken care of by his father for the rest of his life. His father had always picked his schools, his friends, tried to control his girlfriends, decided where he was going to work, what his future was going to be, and had talked of his plans to buy a compound in Florida in which there would be houses for not only Kitty and Jose Menendez, but one for Lyle and whomever he would marry, and one for Erik and whomever he would marry, and various other relatives. So there was no real concern that he was not going to have money and be taken care of all of his life. The prosecution is going to produce evidence of certain purchases, of money that was spent by Lyle Menendez after his parents died. There's information about the watches. He bought a car. He made offers on a couple of condominiums. The only one that actually ever closed was the condominium in Princeton, which his parents were in the process of buying for him, at the time of their death. It was to close in about 2 weeks. Lyle had helped pick it out, and they were going to pay for it. You will also hear that he purchased a restaurant, and you will hear from his aunt and uncle about their decision to go along with this idea because of their desire to give some structure to the chaotic existence which followed the death of his parents. You will be given information which will help you, I think, to understand the grief process, and that everyone does not experience it the same way, and that even people who kill other people mourn their loss, miss them, and love them. If this wasn't about money, then what was it about? This trial will take you behind the facade of the rich houses, the fancy cars, the wealthy friends, and impressive social engagements. It will take you to the life that was experienced by Lyle Menendez and his brother as they grew up. There's a picture on the board in the middle, which is a picture of Lyle and his little brother, Erik. All of his life, he was responsible for protecting Erik, and he didn't always do it. And in fact, he sometimes hurt his brother. And as he grew older, the responsibility that he felt for him, for this child with whom he shared a war-zone life, became even stronger, and his sense of guilt over some of his shortcomings loomed very large for him. The events which took place on August 20th, 1989, had their genesis long, long before. But immediately before the killing, in those last few days, that last week, an event began which set all of this in motion. Erik Menendez told his brother Lyle Menendez that he couldn't stand it any longer. His father had been molesting him for 12 years. It had gotten more violent, and he couldn't take it. He needed help. He couldn't get out. He couldn't leave, and he couldn't take on his father. And so he turned to his big brother. And his big brother, who had a fairly nice life going for him at the time, had spent the summer at tennis camps, was going back to Princeton in the fall to live in this new condominium, had a girlfriend all lined up that he'd been establishing a relationship with that summer, could not turn his back on his brother, that this had been going on for the 12 years. He believed Erik. He believed him because he was his brother, but more importantly, he believed him because he remembered what had happened to him when he was much younger. His experience with his father in terms of molestation had been for a much shorter period of time. It was from about 6 to 8. But he remembers what it felt like. He remembers the fear and the confusion, the importance of being loved and made to feel special by this charismatic, powerful man who was the center of his universe. He also remembered that when he was 13, he sensed something was going on with his brother. And gathering up all of his courage, he prepared for a talk with his father, as he always prepared for a talk with his father. He made notes and he rehearsed because he didn't want to lose the ability to deliver the message that he had to give him by virtue of being ridiculed for his grammar or laughed at for his lisp or in some way derailed from his purpose. And so at 13, he went to Jose Menendez and told him he knew what was going on and he wanted it to stop. And his father promised him that it would. Lyle decided that it worked when he was 13, or at least he thought it had. So he was going to try the same procedure again. He was going to talk to his dad about it. Only now he was older. He posed much more of a threat. He could tell people. Maybe somebody would believe him now. He knew he wouldn't have been believed at 13. But maybe at 21, he would be believed. So he, again, prepared for a talk with his father. He made notes, he rehearsed, and then he confronted him. And he told him that he knew what had been going on, and it was going to stop. And it was going to stop now. And his father was going to let him take his little brother and leave the house. He had underestimated his father grossly. His father indicated to him in no uncertain terms that Erik Menendez was his son and he would do whatever he wanted with his son, and that no one was going to threaten him, and no one was going to control him, and no one was going to have a secret like this with which to destroy him. He made it very clear to Lyle Menendez that this secret would never leave this family, and that the people who held this secret and this power over him would not be allowed to live. Needless to say, this was not what Lyle had envisioned. Had his brother told him before this conversation, rather than after it, the details of the torture and the sexual abuse he had endured, he would have had a clearer picture of the man with whom he was dealing. Lyle's violent experiences with his father had been for the most part when he was young. He respected, admired, loved his father, but more than that, wanted to be loved by his father and found worthy. He didn't think on a daily basis about all of the signs in the past, and he didn't think clearly about them before he spoke with his father. The next few days, he went back and forth between fear and hope, sure that what the message was was of impending death, and yet hoping that somehow Dad, who could always fix everything, would somehow find a way out of this for the family, that somehow he would let him know it was okay. And over the next few days, different events occurred which accelerated the brother's fear. On Friday, after this conversation with his father, on Thursday night, and after finding out from his mother that she had known all along of Erik's abuse and didn't protect him, the brothers decided to go buy handguns. That seemed like a smart way to protect themselves. What they didn't know was you can't go in and just buy a handgun. You have to wait 2 weeks. And they figured they probably wouldn't be around in 2 weeks. So they went to another gun store and they talked, and someone said, "Why don't you buy shotguns? That's what people use to protect themselves." It didn't seem to be nearly as good as being able to have a handgun on you, but it seemed better than being there unprotected. And so they bought the shotguns. They used Donovan Goudreau's driver's license. Donovan had been a very close friend of Lyle's, far closer than Glenn Stevens. And Donovan, because of some things he had done, made a lot of people angry. And Lyle's friends, including Glenn Stevens, and Lyle's father demanded that Donovan be thrown out of the dorm room. Lyle didn't want to do it, but he knew that if he didn't, his father would come do it for him. And so Donovan was ordered out of the dorm room and left behind a number of things, a bag with a lot of objects in it, and included there was Donovan Goudreau's license. And a witness will tell you, not that Lyle gleefully took this with some nefarious purpose, but that she found it on the floor when helping move Lyle out of the dorm room a short time later. Erik Menendez carried that driver's license because he was under 21 and physically quite similar to Donovan. On the date of the shotgun purchase, Lyle did not have a valid California driver's license. His license here had been suspended some time before, and he'd been living in New Jersey. When the prosecution talks about this plan, this carefully crafted alibi, it so happens that Lyle Menendez had made plans to go to the movie on Sunday night sometime before. And on that day, he made a plan to meet Perry Berman and his friend Todd Hall afterwards. He wanted to be out of the house, and these plans, which the prosecution now wants to characterize as an alibi, merely proved where he wasn't. Alibis generally are someone saying you were somewhere else, and they can prove it at the time of the crime. And so his plans with Perry Berman merely highlight the fact that he didn't show up where he was supposed to be. They said they went to the movies, and I guess a good plan would have been to have movie tickets, but they didn't have those either. Certain incidents happened right before the parents died, which led these children to believe that they were about to be killed. And they acted. And when it was over, they waited. Although their home was very big, it happens to be close enough to the neighbors' homes that you can hear the television set in your neighbor's house, particularly on a summer evening in August when the windows are open. They knew that when they fired off multiple rounds from shotguns, 2 of them, that everyone would hear, and they did. Any number of neighbors heard this noise. What they didn't count on is that no one called the police station, which was only minutes away. And in that period of time while they were waiting, they made a decision. Maybe we don't have to go to jail. And maybe we don't ever have to tell what happened to this family we want to be so proud of. This family of whom we are a reflection. This family with whom our identity is inextricably tied. And they turned on the light in a room which had previously been illuminated only by the television set, and they picked up shotgun shells. Somehow that seemed like the thing to do. They dumped the guns. They went to the movie theater to get tickets for the movie they were going to see, but it was too late. Couldn't buy tickets. But they did find out that one of the shows had been sold out on that trip. And then they went to the Taste of L.A. to try to meet their friend Perry Berman. They didn't have a real sense of what time it was and had no idea that it was far too late. And when they got there, he wasn't there. So Lyle Menendez called him on the phone. And Perry Berman will tell you that he heard something in Lyle's voice, some sort of anxiety, some heightened emotion. And he said, "I've got to see you. I've got to talk to you. It's really important. Meet us at the Cheesecake Factory." Convinced Perry to meet him there. And as they left the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium to go to the Cheesecake Factory, both of the boys continued the emotional falling apart that had begun much earlier. But Erik was far more hysterical. Erik was always very emotional, cried easily, and was falling apart. And it was up to his big brother to try and take care of him. He was the one who was supposed to be there for him. So they drove back home. They couldn't continue this any longer. They needed some resolution of it. And yet they didn't want to tell what really had happened. And so they called the police. Lyle Menendez called 911. And you will hear the tape. And there is no question that he lies in the tape. But the emotion is genuine. He goes down to the police station to be interviewed, and Sergeant Edmonds will tell you there was not a doubt in this police officer's mind that these boys were genuinely upset. But they weren't going to tell. They'd made that decision. And so they told not a sophisticated story, not a substantiated story, not of being somewhere where witnesses could say that they were. They didn't produce movie tickets. They just said we went to the movies and then we went to Taste of L.A. The police very early on suspected that the boys were responsible. They began to look at the spending, which I guess if you're going to cover up a crime, you wouldn't begin a few days later by spending a large amount of money on Rolex watches and then start making offers on condominiums and buying expensive cars.
Right, counsel, let's not argue the case, just make an opening statement of what you expect the evidence to be.
We will be able to show you that there were things, that there were facts that show that this was not done for the money. The boys believed they were out of the will. Jose and Kitty had been discussing taking them out of the will, had told various people they were already out of the will, including their sons. The sons knew that their father's business was required to have a $5 million insurance policy on him. It was one of the employment perks that he had. And they knew that their father had not yet taken the physical examination and was scheduled to take it within the next few weeks. They did not know about the one insurance policy, which was the only money that they ever received after this. Their aunt had arranged that with their father, and they never even knew that it existed. The prosecution has told you of the confession to Dr. Oziel. You will hear what Dr. Oziel has to say. You'll have the opportunity to observe him. We will provide you with additional information which will assist you in evaluating Dr. Oziel's credibility. The brothers had made a decision that they were not going to reveal the family secrets. And so they gave him some information, and Dr. Oziel filled in some of the blanks himself. What you will hear in this court from Lyle Menendez, from his teachers, from his coaches, from his friends, his neighbors, his relatives, will be the story of what life was like for him and his brother. You have to remember that the child to whom some of these things happened was not the 25-year-old young man sitting here today, but the young man pictured up on the board. For Lyle, most of the sexual abuse and violence occurred in the years before he was 10. He was arrested in March of 1990, and he first spoke of his abuse not to his lawyers, not to the media, but to his family. After he told his family, he began talking to me about it. And after that, we brought in the experts who you will see here in court. They are not the people who make their living testifying in court. You will see Dr. Stuart Hart and Dr. John Conte, both of whom are university professors, one at Washington and one at Indiana, who have made it their life work to study and evaluate violent families, psychological maltreatment, and child abuse. These experts were brought in and given free rein. They were told that they could spend as much time as they wanted with Lyle Menendez. They could review any documents they wanted, see any photographs we had, interview any witnesses they wanted. And what they did was to each spend over 60 hours apiece with Lyle Menendez, just the expert and Lyle Menendez. They then read over 2,000 pages of interviews with people. They looked at photo albums of the entire family history. They talked to me. They consulted with other experts. And they each selected 10 to 12 witnesses whom they thought were important. And they interviewed those witnesses individually. By now, each of them has spent over 300 hours on this case. They have seen and read and talked to everyone they wanted to talk to. They've met with family members. They've interviewed friends, girlfriends, coaches, and teachers. And for months, they gave no information of what their conclusion was. And they will tell you here in court what a year and a half later they have discovered. They will explain to you the type of abuse that was suffered and the effect that it had. They will explain to you what happened to Lyle Menendez and what the relationship was of those events to what happened on August 20th, 1989. Lyle Menendez will also testify here in court. You will have an opportunity to see him, to hear him, to evaluate his credibility, and to watch him be examined and cross-examined here in front of you. And what Lyle will tell you will be that he got several messages from his parents, from his mother, who didn't want him in the first place, and told him all of his life, that he had ruined her life, that she could have had a great career in broadcasting or drama, but for him. He was told on a regular basis that he was inadequate. He was humiliated, degraded, and rejected by this woman who in the last 3 years of her life was violent, unstable, drug-addicted, alcohol-dependent, and obsessive. He lived in a world of contradictions. For most of the time, the house was filthy. The laundry piled up. The ferret, who was never trained to go to the bathroom wherever he should have, went to the bathroom all over the house. They would have boxes and boxes and boxes of carnation bars and no other food. And then his mother would decide she was going to sell Shackley vitamins, and all of the toys would be thrown out and the cupboards would be filled with the vitamins. He was punished by being put under her bed where it was too small for him to turn over, which happened to be one of the areas the ferret liked to use to go to the bathroom. He will tell you of doing his term paper, and when called by her not responding soon enough, and having her rip it up in front of his eyes. He will tell you of being chased by her with a knife, of calling to her when she's in the kitchen making dinner, and her cutting herself, and her smearing her blood on his face, and making him sit through dinner, and his fear that he was going to have to go to school in that condition. He will tell you of the abandonment which a number of people saw. Kitty Menendez had to drag her children with her shopping. But her solution was to leave Lyle Menendez and his younger brother in his care and go shopping. And eventually they'd be picked up by the security guards, and eventually she would be paged, and she would tell the people she was shopping with, "That's fine, I know where they are." And the children would sit with the security guards waiting for her to come back. They would be left at school and at tennis practice for hours afterward. The message was always the same. I didn't want you in the first place, and I don't want you now. You get in the way, you ruin my life. And this was complicated by the fact that Jose Menendez took an extraordinary interest in this first child of his heir apparent. And there's an interesting photograph on the board on the left side on the bottom, which is Jose Menendez with his little boy, Lyle Menendez, in exactly the same posture, in exactly the same position, hands in pocket, foot on stairs. And Lyle Menendez was Jose's great project. What one of the relatives says, he was to be the corrected version of Jose. He was to have all of the things that Jose didn't have. Well, all of us want for our children the best. We all want for them the things we didn't have. But for him, the particular areas of concern were the fact that he did not get to have the special training and coaching so that he could have been the swimming star he thought he could have been. He lived his life humiliated by the fact that he was surrounded by Ivy League graduates, and he'd gone to Queens College. He also, for reasons that I think are described by his background, resented the fact that at age 15 he had to leave Cuba, where he loved to tell everybody he was a member of the aristocracy, and came to America, and he had to do menial work. He had to support himself. He had to wash dishes and sweep floors. He was going to get back his social position and more. And his son was going to be the prince. He was going to play tennis, have the best coaches. He was going to go to Princeton. He was going to have all the money he needed. He was not going to suffer any of the degradation of being working class, which was so offensive to Jose. And it was interesting because he ran into a woman, Mary Louise Anderson, who had a lot of the same issues. She was the daughter of a divorced family in a small Irish Catholic town in Illinois, where people didn't get divorced in the 40s, and she was ostracized. She had a violent, bigoted, cruel father who left her mother. Her mother was at first emotionally unstable enough that she was hospitalized and spent the rest of her life mourning the loss of her husband, and gave Kitty Menendez the same message that Kitty Menendez gave her children. You know, things were fine until kids came along. Kids change your life. Well, kids changed Kitty Menendez's life, because now Jose spent all the time that he wasn't either spending working or with his girlfriends, with his son. He told his son he was special. He told his son he was going to be great. He would spend hours with this little child in the basement, giving him inspirational talks, passing along motivational material, drilling him on tennis, making him repeat, making him memorize, conditioning him to have all of the thoughts that Jose thought were right, and none of his own. One of his cousins says one of the most amazing things about Lyle Menendez as a little boy was he would start a sentence to tell you what he thought. He'd glance over at his dad and see that look of disapproval, and midstream switch that sentence around to the other position, which he knew was the right one for his dad, regardless of what his own views were. The children saw Jose Menendez as all-powerful. He flaunted the law. He bragged of his illegal acts. He told with glee of firing people and destroying careers. He reveled in his sadism. He talked to them about all he could do. He was the shepherd, and the rest were the sheep, a message that he passed on to his son and made him memorize. He convinced his son that he was inept, that he was helpless, on a child with absolutely no regard.
Counsel, I said, don't argue the case. You've been going through a lot of this in argument rather than just presentation of what you expect the evidence to be.
Witnesses will tell you of a young man who was shy, introverted, and sensitive. You will hear of what dinner was like at the Menendez home, what other people called Jeopardy dinners, where you were quizzed, and the price for not knowing the answer was to be made to feel stupid. If you didn't swim well enough, you were yelled at. You were held underwater. When you played tennis, you were drilled and drilled and drilled. And where other kids played for an hour, you played for 6. And when Dad wanted to teach you reflex drills, he hit the ball as hard as he could directly at you. So the Lyle Menendez walked away from many a reflex drill with a number of welts. What happens to this child who is supposed to be perfect when it turns out he has a speech impediment? He's ridiculed, he's laughed at, he starts a sentence and is humiliated and stops talking. He walks like a duck with his feet out, and his father quacks and tells him not to walk with him. It's too embarrassing. When at 14 he's still wetting the bed, his sheets appear on the breakfast room table. When he brings a rabbit home from school and his mother says your father wants to have you get rid of it, and he doesn't do it for a few days, he comes home and asks his mother where the rabbit is. She says, ask your father. And his father tells him, go to the garbage. And there is the rabbit with its head smashed. Others who lived in that house knew that when Jose took off his belt, someone was going to get beaten. You didn't know who, and you didn't know why. And when Lyle had the nerve to go into a deli at about age 7 and buy some junk food, and his father looked in the bag, he didn't lecture him about health or rotten teeth. He just socked him in the stomach. And when in wrestling, Lyle grabbed him in his genitals, playing around during the time he was being molested, Jose took him and threw him into a table, a coffee table. And you will still see the scar on his eye. And we have a photograph, and we have medical records. Lyle also has a scar that runs down his lip to his chin. When he was about 16, he was out practicing tennis. And his father watched him and came and harassed him and pushed him in ways that his coach said he'd never seen done before. And when Lyle yelled at him to shut up, his father grabbed him, put him in the limousine, which was his father's usual means of transportation, grabbed him by the throat, and socked him square in the face, and said, if you ever embarrass me again, I will kill you. The Menendez family blended sex and violence. They showed porno films to neighbors who were outraged and then bragged they'd shown them to the children. They had no boundaries. The boys showered with their father up to the very end, and their mother in their teens was still coming in the bathtub and bathing them and washing their hair. The problem is children love their parents and want to be loved by them. And so they stay and they endure and they believe they are responsible. And between the years...
Yes, counsel, again, this is not the opportunity to argue the case. It's the opportunity to give the jury an idea of what you expect the evidence to be.
Thank you. Between the years of 6 and 8, around the time Lyle was playing soccer, as you can see from the picture on the right, his father extended these intense conversations into massages. He told them that this was the type of thing that the Romans did, that this is what fathers and sons do, that he was special, that this was a special bond that they had. And he began the sexual molestation. And Lyle felt confusion and fear, but he also liked the attention, and he also liked the fact that Dad thought he was important. But as things progressed, objects were used, which hurt, and eventually there was an anal rape, which hurt even more. Lyle confronted his dad, screamed at him, told his mother, "Please ask Dad to leave me alone. He's hurting me." She said, "Your dad loves you. You have to be punished sometimes." The teachers will tell you of the pressure that they saw and of the sadness they saw. And they will admit to you that they didn't interfere and they didn't protect these children because they were afraid of the parents. They were afraid of Jose Menendez, and they were afraid of Kitty Menendez. The coaches will tell you of the brutality and the control exhibited through the lessons, and those who wouldn't go to the extent that was required were fired. In 1986, the family moved to California, and about this time, Kitty Menendez discovered that her husband had been having an affair for approximately 8 years. An already unstable woman now got worse. She was seeing a therapist on a regular basis. She was taking massive dosages of antidepressant drugs. She was drinking. She was acting in all kinds of obsessive ways. She was leaving suicide notes for her sons. She was attempting suicide. She was threatening to poison the family. A crazy woman got even crazier. During the last week, Lyle and Erik Menendez talked to each other about experiences that each of them had had that the others didn't even know about. They talked about a mother who was willing to die and willing to kill. They talked about a father who was not going to be controlled by anyone or anything. They talked about parents who can treat their children as objects, who can abuse and use and degrade them. And they knew that these were parents who could kill their children.
So, looking back at these opening statements, there's a lot of things that seem to be in line with each other, but the question is, why didn't the brothers come clean? Was it truly trying to save face, save embarrassment? Probably more for themselves, because if their parents were as horrific as they state, father sexually abusing them, mother physically abusing them, and complicit in knowing what dad is doing to these kids, really, would they really care to save face for Jose and Kitty? I feel that they wanted to obviously save their own face, and that's understandable to a point. I don't think anybody wants to admit if they were sexually abused. I could not imagine being in a case like that, having that experience. And a part of me believes them. A part of me believes that this truly happened, and they really were afraid for their lives. And they should have the opportunity to not have to live the rest of their lives behind bars. Another part of me wonders, well, why did it have to come down to that? Especially killing their mother. Even though she told her oldest, Lyle, that she didn't love him, allegedly, and all these things, their original story was that they killed her because she was there and she was complicit. So, nothing, in my opinion, nothing makes murder okay. They murdered their parents, and that's something that they always admitted to. The reasons why they did it are what have been in question since 1989. So over 30 years later, what do you guys think? Do you think that they should be allowed to be freed and get on parole? Or do you think that they should stay in prison? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And I'm definitely interested to hear what you guys think for sure. All right, guys, I hope you have a great rest of the day. And most of all, stay safe.